Hi, this is a video response to a video recently uploaded by Marco from Multiverso Distópico. In that video, he talks about RPG focus, that is, in the design process of creating a role playing game. I'm going to put a link in the description below so that you can watch that video. But this particular video is not going to be about focusing on the strengths and avoiding the pitfalls when designing a role-playing game. This has more to do with a couple of elements that caught my attention. These two things are weapon specialization and video games. Mostly why I've what would you say, moved a bit more towards tabletop role-playing games as when compared to video games. Even though in the past I played both of them almost at an equal level, I'm usually in these days leaning towards tabletop role-playing games more. First, let's talk about weapon specialization. I've actually found it a very, what would you say, difficult to handle area in role-playing games because some games handle it completely loosely. That is, if you know how to use a single weapon, you can use any type of weapon. They handle that kind of approach. But in other games, they specialize quite a bit in all sorts of different weapons. That is, if you're using knives or short swords or warhammers, katana, spears, battle axes, etc. And so you need your character to specialize in very different narrow categories to be effective with them, and you become quite penalized if you do not do so. So this got me thinking that I think there is yet to be an effective way of handling this. Well, it's quite impossible to reach perfection in that regard. But the thing is, there are two main topics of concern. One is there are weapons that are too specialized and you will not be able to know how to use them unless you practice and practice and practice. For one of the more complex ones would be the kusarigama, using the sickle and the chain. You probably seen it many times in, for example, in anime. It's a weapon of choice of ninja. It's one of the best weapons to neutralize swords because you wrap your chain around the sword of your enemy and you either attack him with the sickle, or there's usually like a weight at the end of the chain, and you can also use that to attack your enemy. But it requires quite a bit of skill. If you do not know how to use the kusarigama, that is in real life, you will end up getting yourself hurt or others. And so that's a weapon that I would consider that you require quite a bit of specialization. But there are some weapons that are considerably simple, like for example, anything that resembles a stick or a sword. Let me put it this way. If you know how to use these sticks, you will know the basics of how to use short swords, for example. And I'm telling you because based on my experience and studies, and there are people that didn't specialize in the use of short swords or blades, and because they knew how to use short sticks, they're even capable of defeating someone who uses short blades or short swords. Of course, it obviously helps if you are using short swords as well, but you have like the basic mechanics to perform all the types of techniques to parry and counter and attack. So, and that's what I would consider a broad category of weapon specialization. Or you could also, use this quarterstaff, and you would know how to use, for example, a spear, because many of the techniques are quite similar. In fact, you could actually benefit from knowing how to use the staff and then use a spear, but because sometimes you get too fixated on attacking with the bladed or pointed part of the spear. But if you know how to use a quarterstaff, you would be able to attack with the blunt side quite effectively as well, to the point of killing someone. So it's because you need to know where to hit. You're not going to attack those areas that will not cause what would you say, a definitive lethal result. So you will focus on targeting those vulnerable areas of your opponents. So those categories just seem too broad, and I sometimes dislike when games have you specializing too much on things because, oh, you know how to use short sticks, but you do not have any idea on how to use short swords and stuff like that. There are some nuances. So for example, when it comes to knife fighting, that is quite a beautiful thing to behold when it's used as an art form, but in close combat as well. Well, it's quite deadly, and you do require some extra knowledge, especially when you're handling opponents that like to grapple and such. And there are even more things that can be expanded. So for example, there are people who know how to use knives that also develop techniques to fight with, for example, with a pen. The way that I'm holding this pen right now, it's many martial artists will be familiar with this, and you can apply pressure at certain areas of the arm, and you will have your opponent screaming because of the pain that you cause with this. And yes, I'm not talking about that. Yeah, you stick the pen in your opponent or whatever. No, I'm just talking about grasping the arm of your opponent in a specific area, and you're going to cause a lot of pain just by holding it like this. And so it's really difficult to handle the aspect of weapon specialization, but I think it's mostly because martial arts as a discipline gives you a lot of an advantage when using almost any type of weapons. That is Eastern martial arts. There are probably other, in this day and age, disciplines have traveled all over the world, so there are probably other disciplines that use many different techniques. But I think that martial arts cannot give you an edge when it comes to weapon specialization, especially because you also learn to use your body in conjunction, or you say in combination with your weapon attacks. Because sometimes, for example, let's say somebody who doesn't know martial arts and uses a knife, he's going to be too focused on the weapon and not going to be using his legs or his hands to grapple, to hit, to strike, to kick. And that's something that many, what would you say, not very versatile fighters ignore, that sometimes they focus too much on the weapon and they forget that they have all of this to attack, even the head and shoulders, and that could that sounds like shampoo and that gives you the blow that will allow you to score a true deadly hit. Or as I was telling you, you know, really know martial arts, you will be able to finish off an opponent with your bare hands without the use of a weapon. The body is really vulnerable. It's surprising how easy it is to die from a really bad hit. So as I was telling you, the whole weapon specialization thing is just, I think that we have yet to see a system that handles it better. Now let's talk about the, what would you say? Yes, why kind of leaned away from video games just a bit, because I saw that Marco, he said that he also used to play more tabletop role-playing games these days and not as many video games. And I'm going to share my experience as to why I lean more towards tabletop RPGs. I think that games in current times have become too mainstream for their own good. I've actually studied quite a bit of video games. Well, for example, in my college thesis, I have my newspaper report here. I did a thesis that is called, this title in the newspaper is really over the top. It says, "Video games, possible path to God." Now, that was pretty over the top. That was not my intention, but my thesis original title is "Video games, graphic styles according to genres." And it's a study of different of design and different genres according to different different graphic styles according to the genres in video games. So what I did notice is that in the past, of course, video games were kind of like somewhat of a niche hobby, but they became more and more mainstream as people saw that they were quite lucrative as a field. And I think that hurt video games quite a bit in a particular aspect of having that niche sort of like more enclosed sort of way. And others could say that it's also positive because, for example, thanks for video games being more mainstream, there are more players and there are more resources to create more games, produce more games. But because of the sponsors and trying to design a game based on what they think it will sell, sometimes the essence of a particular video game setting suffers for it. Because these days I play mostly retro games. I still play some of the newer titles, but I focus more on those retro games where it feels like there is this world and the designers almost didn't care about what everybody else thought about. They just wanted to create this incredible, amazing, wonderful video game world, and you feel like you're almost traveling to another dimension. But nowadays, you're going to see things in video games and you're like, oh, they added that character because that's like a trend nowadays, or oh yeah, they added that too, or that type of music because that's how what's really popular nowadays. And well, if you're kind of like part of the masses or of that enjoys that, well, there will be no trouble for you. But for those that are looking for something a bit more original, well, they're going to feel a bit left out. So I don't know if Marco got distanced himself from video games because of that, but that's certainly a thing for me. Another thing that I think that has made me lean more towards tabletop role playing games is that video games feel somewhat limited in different ways. Many of you are already aware of this, of course, but I would like to elaborate a bit more. For example, the most obvious part, video games, you have to work within within certain rules. If you want your character to climb or to jump or perform some sort of investigation, use your weapon in some unusual way, perhaps as a tool to dig out something or whatever. If the video game is not programmed for that, you will not be able to do it. And of course, that's the freedom of tabletop roleplay games. You can do pretty much anything that you want, or you can try it. But the other thing that I also think that is quite limiting in video games is that when you buy a video game, you are pretty much set on playing that specific adventure and nothing else. So let's say that you buy a game called The Quest into the Labyrinth of Lava, and you're going into that labyrinth, and once you finish the game, that's it. You could play it again, you could find out all of the secret rooms and weapons and everything, but once you do that, that's it. You will have to buy another game with a different story. And with tabletop role-playing games, once you purchase the core rulebook, at least in the best case scenario, there are other tabletop role-playing games that require probably like 2 or 3 core rulebooks, but those are very specific cases. In most cases, they're going to be like it's going to feel like they are milking the product, especially when they sell you almost the same book 3 times with many very minimal changes. But as I was telling you, when you buy the core rulebook or rule books, you can play all your life. You have all the tools to play so many different types of adventures and such. I know this is not like the best comparison or the best argument, but that's what I think of things. So I do consider that video games have been somewhat affected because of that, and it's still pretty nice to see all those indie developers trying to go back to the roots of video games, because many AAA titles have lost a lot of that essence. Many beloved franchises, such for example Mega Man, Castlevania, have suffered for it because of all those greedy people that are more focused on selling things instead of creating something original. And it kind of reminds me of what happened, because I like to study a lot when it comes to the past of tabletop role-playing games, and you can see when different RPGs first came out and they were really cool, they had that charm to them, the creators were trying to create something original, but then these kind of like sharks that first didn't pay attention to tabletop role-playing games, they noticed that they became somewhat lucrative, and so they took control of things, but they are not gamers. They will never understand a gamer because they are not gamers and don't care about having fun. They care about getting money and money, and that's all. And I think something similar is happening at times with video games, and all the trying to streamline things and make it more mainstream. There are actually games that I consider that became somewhat easier as you play them. So, for example, first you had Demon Souls, and wow, that was really difficult. But especially because of the invasions, that is, some other player could invade your realm, and you had to fight to the death, or you will lose all your souls. They're kind of like experience points. But then they started removing that, so that because players started complaining that I hate it when they kill me in Demon Souls, and so with Dark Souls later on, they made it almost an optional thing, not exactly like that, but they somewhat lessened the invasion aspect. So that's also a thing that I dislike, that in order to sell more games, you need to make them a bit easier, just a bit. The Dark Souls is still pretty hard, but I did consider that aspect of invasion to be one of the coolest factors. I haven't played Dark Souls 3. Maybe they implemented that thing again, hopefully. But in the other Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, it almost felt like a very optional thing rather than a threat. So those are my thoughts on those couple of things that came into my mind as I watched Marco's video. I highly recommend that you watch it again. The link's in the description below. And well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.